presentation is titled The Eternal War. I did my context analysis on the poem Fear. Um, so, in the introduction to the poem, World War II for historians was from September 1st, 1939 to September 2nd, 1945. But the physical and psychological beatings happened for the 6 years, you say. But you could say that as the author John Kozlowski said in his memoir, war has no beginning and no end. During their incarceration, they suffer those physical and psychological beatings every day. But the psychological, the unexplainable feeling that I'm going to talk about lasts a lifetime. So for the people that went through the concentration camps, the war really had no end. Okay, so I said the author is John Kozlowski. He was born in 1948, which is actually 3 years after the war. His parents were Polish Catholics. They met in one of the camps, I'm not sure which one. And he talks about in the poem kind of they were in love, but they never made love because out of fear. So that's like a big takeaway from it. Soon after the war, he immigrated to the United States with his parents. So contextually, he speaks to American audience, and he's able to speak about non-Jew prisoners, which you don't really hear often because his parents were Polish Catholic. And the poem was written in 2008, which is obviously a long time after the war, over 6 decades after the war. And a big reason that this plays in the poem is because he was able to understand his parents and how they actually were after the war. And that's like a huge, if you don't know that, then it's kind of, you don't really grasp the truth behind the poem. And I interpreted the poem as told from his father's perspective. You could really interpret it as any male that was in the camp at the time. So the poem, I broke it down into 4 parts. Part 1, I talk about the 2 certainties of work and death. It says, during the war, there was only work and death. The work broke you down, filled your stomach with rocks, and threw you down into the river. That talks about the physical part of the camp, how they physically beat them down. They fed them like little to nothing, and it took a toll on their body. The second part was the social and psychological aspect of the camp. In the camps, there was only what we ate and those who we worked with. And it's kind of Hitler's regimes taking away, they're dehumanizing them, and they're taking away the social aspect, which kind of makes you not a person, in my opinion. Part 3, it's kind of where he introduces the unexplainable feeling of fear. And just to summarize this part, is there's hundreds of women being dumped out of trucks, and guards were beating them and leading them to their death, but out of fear, the men just stood there and did nothing. Although it's like your male's internal process to try and help a woman, they just stood there and they don't know why. That's kind of unexplainable feeling that he was trying to get at. And finally, part 4 introduces you to life after prison for the prisoners. You will take this fear to the grave with you, I can promise. And after the war, it was the same. I saw things that were as bad as what happened in the camps. I wish I had a gun there. I would have pressed it to my forehead right here. So it kind of prefaces like what his parents' lives were like after the war, and it never really ended for them. We go to the 2 truths about the war that I feel like he was trying to get through. So the first, the unexplainable feeling that they felt. Hitler's regime, in the analysis that I did, they said that he was unique in the fact that most rulers in the past exterminated people, exterminated a race to benefit them as a ruler. Say like the Greeks went in and did this because it benefited the ruler. Or they used enslaved people to have them do work to further their regime. Hitler simply did it to dehumanize a race that he claimed was not the master race. So that's unique, and that's why kind of the psychological aspect takes part in the war. The unexplainable feeling, to me, the first time I ever heard of it was in Mother Night, Andor Gutman. It was like chapter 2, he talked about when he volunteered for the Sonderkommando, which is the people that volunteered, they were prisoners, and they volunteered to take the prisoners into the gas chambers, I guess. they like cleaned it up, and they eventually like led to their own deaths, and they knew it, but they didn't know why they volunteered for it. And he has I guess a dialogue with the narrator, and he said, the narrator said, "Why'd you do it?" He said, "If you were to write a book, that would be a great book." And he's like, "Do you have no reason as to why you did it?" And he says, "That's why I paid a great deal of money for a book with the answer in it." So he simply, he didn't know what the feeling was, and that's kind of unexplainable feeling. And the way that Hitler degraded the prisoners, or like the process that they psychologically went through, first, in the first stages of the imprisonment, they had like grandiose thoughts about after the war, and then once they were physically and psychologically beat down, they traded that for they just wanted a hot bath, full stomach, and a clean bed. And then finally, when it really like got crazy, like to me, was that in the final stages of most imprisonments, they began acting like infants, and a lot of prisoners started impersonating the guards, and they were trying to dress like them and copy their mannerisms, because that's how like physically beaten or psychologically beaten down they were. And this unexplainable feeling lasts till after or till their death. So the unique perspective that Kozlowski, the author, had was he wrote the poem in 2008, so he's able to see how this unexplainable feeling of fear and survivor's guilt affected his parents' marriage, how they raised him, their interactions with everybody in the world, and their mannerisms. And he said in his memoir, "They're not heroes who ultimately triumphed over their circumstances, but traumatized victims who are never fully able to escape or overcome their wartime experience." And there's been a lot of studies on prisoners that their inability to function, like the men who just stood around and watched the women get beaten, it lasts with them for the rest of their life after imprisonment. So the war really stuck with the prisoners for the rest of their life, and that's kind of what the context of the poem explains. That's kind of what he was getting at in the last part of the poem. So in conclusion, the war was over 6 decades ago, but for many that are alive, and prisoners, the war isn't over yet. The unexplainable feeling and the fear that they felt, and you could say the survivor's guilt, where he talks about in the poem, if I would have had a pistol, I'd stick it right here, talking about his forehead. The context of that poem kind of shows that the war never ends for the survivors, and they would wish that they were rather dead. Any questions?